Canada. The name Canada is the result of one big misunderstanding. In 1535, French explorer Jacques Cartier heard local St. Lawrence Iroquois people say Kanata, meaning village or settlement. Cartier thought it referred to the whole land. He even wrote it down in his maps and reports, cementing the error. Before long, Canada appeared in European documents as the official name for the vast territory, far bigger than the original Kanata village near modern-day Quebec City. Ironically, the indigenous word that once referred to a small settlement is now the name of the second largest country in the world. Even more surprising, the people who first used the word never intended it to name a nation at all. Japan. In Japanese, the country is called Nippon or Nihon, meaning origin of the sun. The name came from China in the 7th century when envoys described the islands as being east of the Asian continent, where the sun rises. That's why Japan is still called the land of the rising sun. But the Western name, Japan, was a linguistic game of telephone. Chinese traders pronounced it Sipan, which was heard by Malay sailors as Japang, then picked up by Portuguese explorers as Japan. By the time it reached English, it became Japan. In other words, the name we use today is the result of centuries of misheard syllables carried across thousands of miles. It reflects how trade, travel, and translation errors can permanently shape history. Egypt. The name Egypt comes from the ancient Greek Aegyptos, itself derived from Hikupta, the name of a temple to the god Ptah in the city of Memphis. But Egyptians never called their country that. In ancient times, it was Kemet, meaning black land, a reference to the fertile soil left by the Nile's floods.
Over time, as Greeks, Romans, and later Arabs took control, foreign names replaced the native one.
Today in Arabic, Egypt is Misr. The name Egypt survives merely as a relic of ancient mispronunciation. That means the name millions use today is based on a single temple that most Egyptians 3,000 years ago probably never even visited.
Russia.
Russia's name traces back to the medieval state of Rus, founded by Viking traders and warriors known as Varangians in the 9th century. The word Rus likely comes from an Old Norse term meaning rowers or seafarers. Over centuries, the territory expanded and united under Moscow's rule.
And Russia became the westernized form of Russia, the name used in the Russian language.
But here's the twist. The Vikings who gave Russia its name were foreigners, and their descendants were absorbed into the Slavic population. So, the largest country on Earth is named after a small band of outsiders whose original language vanished from the land they named,
leaving a permanent linguistic mark on Russian history.
Australia. The name Australia comes from the Latin Terra Australis Incognita, unknown southern land. For centuries, European mapmakers believed a massive continent must exist in the far south to balance the land masses of the north. They drew it on maps long before it was discovered. When the British arrived in 1788, they called it New Holland, after the Dutch explorers who charted parts of the coast. But in the early 19th century, explorer Matthew Flinders argued for the ancient name Australia, connecting the land to centuries of mythical geography. The irony? The name came from a theory based on pure guesswork, one that happened to be right.
Even if the continent looked nothing like the fantasy. Interestingly, Flinders even advocated using Australia officially in correspondence and maps long before it was formally adopted. Iceland.
Iceland's name is the product of clever PR, though not in the way you'd think. According to sagas, the Norwegian explorer Floki Vilgerdarson named it after spotting drift ice in a fjord. But the more popular legend says early settlers gave it a cold, forbidding name to discourage others from moving there. Meanwhile, they named the much colder island to the west Greenland, to make it sound more inviting. Whether or not it was an intentional deception, the result worked. Iceland today is far greener than Greenland, but it's Greenland that's almost entirely covered in ice.
The names are a frozen case of historical misdirection that still baffles geographers and travelers alike. India.
India's name comes from the river Indus, called Sindhu in ancient Sanskrit. Persian invaders pronounced it Hindu, which the Greeks later adapted to Indos. Over time, the name shifted to India in Latin and English. Ironically, much of the Indus River now flows through Pakistan, not India. In the Hindi language, the country is called Bharat, after an ancient king mentioned in the epic Mahabharata. That means India carries two identities at once, the ancient indigenous Bharat and the imported river-based India.
Born from centuries of linguistic transformation and foreign tongues, a duality that influences national identity and cultural pride even today.
Nigeria. Nigeria's name was invented in 1897 by British journalist Flora Shaw, who would later marry the colonial governor. She suggested naming the territory after the Niger River,
the lifeblood of the region's trade and culture.
The word Niger itself comes from the Latin for black. likely a reference by early explorers to the river's dark waters.
Or the skin color of the people.
In a twist, Nigeria's name was never chosen by its people.
It was a colonial branding exercise written in a British newspaper that became permanent when Britain formally merged its northern and southern protectorates in 1914. Today, the name endures as a historical marker of colonial influence over modern national identity.
Argentina. Argentina's name comes from the Latin word argentum, meaning silver. When Spanish explorers arrived in the early 1500s, they heard legends from indigenous people about a land rich in silver to the west. Though they never found the mythical source, the name stuck, reinforced by the Rio de la Plata, or River of Silver,
which explorers named after the shimmering color of its waters.
The irony is brutal. Argentina got its name from a treasure that never existed. Today, the country produces gold, copper, and lithium in abundance. But silver production is relatively small compared to its reputation.
The name is a permanent reminder of a centuries-old wild goose chase that shaped the nation's European identity. Chile.
The origin of Chile is still debated, but the most accepted theory traces it to a word in the Aymara language, Chile, meaning where the land ends.
Early Spanish explorers adopted the term after hearing it from indigenous allies.
Another theory says it comes from the Mapuche imitation of a local bird's call, Chile. Either way, the name captures the country's geography perfectly. Chile stretches like a ribbon along the edge of South America, ending at the tip of the continent. It's a rare case where a poetic description and a bit of onomatopoeia may have fused into a single national name,
reflecting both language and landscape.
Venezuela. When Italian explorer Amerigo Vespucci sailed into Lake Maracaibo in 1499, he saw stilt houses built over the water. They reminded him of Venice, so he called the place Venezuela, or Little Venice. The Spanish adapted it to Venezuela, and the name stuck. The irony? Those stilt houses were part of an indigenous culture that had nothing to do with Venice.
His comparison was purely European projection. Yet today, the entire nation is named after a city half a world away. Thanks to one explorer fleeting visual association, a quirky historical coincidence that shaped a nation's identity, New Zealand.
Dutch explorer Abel Tasman was the first European to sight the islands in 1642, naming them Statenland.
After a region in the Netherlands.
Later, Dutch cartographers renamed it Nova Zeelandia after Zeeland, a Dutch coastal province. When the British took control, they anglicized it to New Zealand. In the Maori language, however, the name is Aotearoa, often translated as Land of the Long White Cloud. This means the country lives with two identities, one given by foreign colonizers who never settled there, and one rooted in indigenous legend and navigation history, preserving a memory of discovery itself. If you enjoy this video, like and subscribe for part 2. You can also suggest a video in the comments.